Hello, good morning, and welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Olumide Macaulay, in for your host, Ladia Keduali. The headlines. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky says Russians pounding frontline positions with artillery fire and in the eastern region launched almost 400 strikes over the weekend. Russia says Ukraine shelled power lines supplying Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant. Both parties accused each other of attacking the plant and risking a nuclear accident. British Prime Minister Sunak meets with President Zelensky in Kiev, pledges more support for Ukraine. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Russian forces are pounding Ukrainian positions with artillery fire, and in the eastern region alone, launched almost 400 strikes over the weekend. According to President Vladimir Zelensky, in a video addressed, this happened in the Luhansk region, where Ukrainian forces are slowly moving forward while fighting. Russia withdrew its forces from the southern city of Kherson this month and moved some of them to reinforce positions in the eastern Donetsk and Luhansk regions, an industrial area known as Donbass. Kyiv says that about 60 Russian soldiers have been killed in long-range artillery attacks in the south, the second time in 4 days that Ukraine is claimed to have inflicted major casualties in a single incident.
The fiercest battles as before are in the Donetsk region, although there are fewer attacks today due to the deterioration of the weather. The number of Russian shelling remains, unfortunately, extremely high. In the Luhansk region, we're slowly moving forward while fighting. As of now, there have been almost 400 artillery attacks in the east since the start of the day. Grateful to each and every one who is holding our front and helping our defense forces. The south, we are holding the defense, consistently and very calculatedly destroying the potential of the occupiers. Works to restore networks and technical supply capabilities, power transmission lines, demining, repairs are taking place day and night. It was possible to ease the situation in some regions where there were a lot of real problems yesterday. Tonight, there are stabilization outages in 15 regions and in Kyiv as well. The largest are Vinnytsia, Sumy, Poltava, Franki, Kyiv regions, and the capital. We're doing everything possible and impossible to return normal life to Odessa, Kharkiv, and all our cities and communities.
Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky. Meanwhile, he says that work continues to restore power in areas targeted by Russian strikes on infrastructure this week. The most problems with electricity are in the city of Kyiv and Kyiv region, city of Odessa and Odessa region, city of Kharkiv and Kharkiv region. Other areas include Chernihiv and other regions. He adds that energy workers are doing everything possible to give people a normal life. The president also thanked UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak for meeting with him in Kyiv. Now, it was Britain's new Prime Minister's first visit to Kyiv over the weekend. Mr. Rishi Sunak pledges to continue the firm support for Ukraine that was a focus of his predecessors and providing a new air defense package to help shoot down Russian drones. During the visit, Sunak said that Britain will provide new air defense support, including 120 anti-aircraft guns, radar and anti-drone equipment. The Prime Minister says Britain will also increase the training it provides to Ukraine's armed forces. During a joint news conference, Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky spoke about Russian rocket strikes on Ukraine.
This year alone, we have provided £2.3 billion of military support, and we will do the same again next year. As you succeed in pushing back Russian forces on the ground, your homes, your hospitals, your power stations are being destroyed by the air. So to help you defend yourselves, we are today providing new air defense support, including 120 anti-aircraft guns, radar, and anti-drone equipment. We're extending our training for the Ukrainian armed forces to include specialist expertise from UK medics and engineers. And we are stepping up our support to help you through the cold, hard winter ahead. This includes winter kit for your troops, help for your amazing first responders, and another £16 million of humanitarian assistance for food and shelter.
Rishi Sunak, UK Prime Minister, and Volodymyr Zelensky, the President of Ukraine. And meanwhile, the British Prime Minister also visited an exhibition displaying destroyed Russian military vehicles with the Ukrainian President Zelensky in Kyiv on Saturday. Video released by the Ukrainian Presidential Press Service shows Sunak and Zelensky speaking to each other while walking in the snow, as you can see. Following the meeting, Sunak says Britain will provide a £50 million air defense package for Ukraine, including anti-aircraft guns and technology to counter Iranian-supplied drones. Russia has increasingly targeted Ukrainian energy infrastructure with long-range attacks since last month, including using what Kyiv says are Iranian-made drones, for which Ukraine has sought air defenses from the West. Joining us now is Professor Soltis Dennis, Professor, Department of Public Administration and International Development in Kazakhstan. Welcome to the program this morning.
Hello, how are you?
Very well, thank you. Can you tell us what your initial impressions are concerning Rishi Sunak's visit to Zelensky?
Well, I would say there are two things going on right now. The conflict between Russia and Ukraine is becoming increasingly internationalized. And Russia is becoming increasingly isolated. Maybe I could kind of jump ahead here. Of course, you're aware of this incident of the accidental strike by the Ukrainian anti-missile that hit a Polish farm and killed 2 people.
Yes.
That has brought home to NATO countries that they could potentially get dragged further into this conflict against their will. And so paradoxically, what this accident has led to is a greater realization on NATO's part that they have to step up anti-aircraft support for Ukraine so that incidents like this, hopefully don't happen again. So that's kind of, one immediate thing. As for Prime Minister Sunak's policy, well, it's a continuation from earlier. From Boris Johnson's policy. Britain's policy here, foreign policy has not changed. But yes, in general, the Western countries and NATO countries are continuing to ramp up supplies of anti-aircraft and heavy weapons. They've been, kind of slow to do this, but finally they're getting around to, providing larger quantities of this. I mentioned that this is increasingly international because this also, the conflict was a major topic at the meeting of the G20 in Bali. A lot of formerly non-aligned countries are becoming increasingly resentful of the war, Putin's war, because it's leading to food and energy shortages and inflation in our own countries. Many of these countries have sort of delicately balanced economies. So there's more and more, resentment of the Russian, invasion.
Do you think, Professor Dennis, that Sunak is also, as you say, it's an internationalized incident as it's becoming more so? Do you think that it's helping him as a new prime minister to be seen to be doing the right things and to be seen to be in the right places? Did he have to go there personally at this point of his prime ministership?
Well, yes, the British public is quite strongly in favor of helping Ukraine. I forget the statistics, but it's, 60, 70%, it's quite, quite strong. In the United States, even high. Well, yeah, it might even be higher. It's very strong support in Britain and the United States. So he doesn't really need to, Sunak doesn't need to really do any posing. I think, this is, more a genuine, helping hand here.
Okay. Now, to the nuclear power plant, which we hear was almost affected by shelling, but not quite so at the end of the day in Zaporizhia. We hear that shelling occurred. Russian media say as much as 15 shells fell around a waste storage facility, but there were no radioactive emissions as a result of that, and both sides have traded blame. What do you think is going on there?
Well, I can't say. Yeah, both sides are, trading blame. Well, obviously, the problem started with the Russian invasion and the Russian, occupation of the plant. And this wasn't a problem before they came. What's going on now? Who's doing what to whom? Is something I don't have any knowledge of, not being on the ground. Okay.
Will it be a way of currying favor or making one think that the Ukrainians are being foolhardy and trying to take the nuclear power plant or even attack the Russians while they're in that very sensitive area? I think something even more sinister is afoot.
No, the Ukrainians wouldn't do that. They avoid shelling, residential areas. They avoided, at a lot, great cost to their own army. They avoided shelling Kherson, and they let the Russian soldiers, most of them, escape from the right bank of Ukraine because these were covered. The Russians covered themselves with civilians, so Ukrainians don't shoot it on their own, on their own people. Instead, what they do is something much harder, and that is, to gradually try to capture the surrounding area, and, cut off supplies, and the idea would be hopefully to squeeze out or starve out that Russian contingent in the power plant. But, this is very iffy. This is very long run, and, I don't know. Presumably, the Russians there would be well supplied with food and whatever they need, because this is important to them, or it's a very valuable strategic asset, tactical asset to them. So anyway, the Ukrainian record is not to shoot on civilians, and of course they don't want to destroy their own infrastructure, and at the very least would they want a nuclear accident? Remember, of course, they had this terrible accident of Chernobyl in 1986. The Ukrainians, least of all, want another nuclear event on their territory.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's why I was mentioning that it won't be a case of friendly fire. Maybe the Russians are shooting on themselves to make themselves look good and make the Ukrainians look bad.
Well, they can fire on Zaporizhia with their artillery while being based inside or near the plants. It's a dirty but effective technique of combat. They can shoot at Ukraine, and Ukraine can't shoot back.
Okay. Speaking of Kherson now, where there's been a withdrawal, and the people are buoyed by the fact that the Russians are no longer there, and we hear reports of people gathering in squares, getting their food donations, supplies in the public, gathering around phones where they can make phone calls and get SIM cards and what have you. We hear that the spirit of the city is buoyed by the Russian withdrawal. Is this a thing that the Ukrainian government can build on going forward?
Well, everywhere that the Ukrainian army has liberated territories, the people have been very happy. So this is part of, so first of all, it's very morale building of the soldiers themselves. They see how grateful the people are. Morally, we might say, or in terms of morale. It's a little bit more unclear to me. Anyway, I'm not a military expert, what this means militarily. It seems it's still one of the bridges, the one on the Kakhovka reservoir, the dam there, is operational or could be operational. So tactically, the Ukrainians could attack from the west, and they would. The idea here would be, they have many tactical choices. The Ukrainians do. They could drive east towards Melitopol, where the Russians are trying to, make a stand, or they can go south straight for Crimea. So it remains to be seen what they would do there. Also, of course, the bigger attack probably would be from the north, from Zaporizhia. So they have a lot of options, the Ukrainians do, because the Russians are stretched out along a narrow front. So the Ukrainians can cut it, at more or less any place that they want to. So here, one possibility in military terms would be a pincer movement against Melitopol. And then once that falls, then they would go for Crimea. Or they might go for Crimea first, or at least to cut off the isthmus, the supplies there. So they have a lot of options. So I don't know what the Ukrainian General Staff would, what they'll devise here.
Yes, Professor Dennis, I was just, and that's my point exactly, that do you think also, in line with what you were saying, how much of it also has to do with the fact that the Russians withdrew to sort of take, what they say when you take a few steps back to go forward, so they can re-strategize and come and attack from different fronts. So the Ukrainians have to be really careful in celebrating this victory?
Well, yes, you always have to be careful in a war. War has ebbs and flows. It's kind of unpredictable. It has a lot to do with psychology, who's feeling hot at the moment or successful. But the Ukrainians have been very methodical. They're patient. They'll soften up the Russian positions with artillery, for weeks and months on end if necessary. And then all of a sudden, when the situation in the Russian army is really bad, it's pretty well on the verge of collapse, then they would, the Ukrainians could invade. So just because the front isn't moving very much doesn't mean that nothing is happening. I hear different, versions, but the general consensus seems to be, and among even, Western observers, that the Russian logistics are very poor in the south. They especially, are poorly prepared for the winter. The Ukrainians are much better prepared for the winter, and they will press the attack all through the winter. The Ukrainians think that the winter will work to their advantage.
Professor Dennis, you're in Kazakhstan. Can you refresh our memories on the position of the Kazakhstan government, and aside from that, the sentiment of the people on the streets against Putin's war?
Okay. Well, the vast majority of the public supports Ukraine sentimentally. The government, of course, has, the country has, close economic and formally military alliance relationships with Russia. But the government has been backing away. The Kazakhstani government does not help to Russia to bypass economic sanctions. It has not contributed to the Russian war effort. It has not sold them any weapons. It has also not recognized the annexations of the Donbass and I think not of Crimea also. Certainly they wouldn't recognize the occupation of Crimea. They might be silent on it, but they're definitely against, they definitely do not recognize the annexation of these latest 4 annexations, including Luhansk and Donbass. So the trend has been for the government also, not only the people, but the government also to move further and further away from sympathy towards Russia. Well, because Russia also, many Russians have made claims on pieces of Kazakhstan also. So, the Kazakhs understand that, they fear anyway that, they might be next. Okay.
And we hope that's a proposition that does not ever occur. Thank you, Professor Soltis Dennis of the Department of Public Administration and International Development in Kazakhstan, for coming on the program this morning.
Be well.
Likewise. After the break, happy ending. First train to liberated Kherson reunites father and son. Please stay with us. Welcome back. Drone footage shot by a Polish broadcaster on Sunday shows the crater left behind by a missile strike on a village close to the Ukrainian border that killed 2 people. The footage from broadcaster TVN also showed broken windows on surrounding buildings of a grain drying facility in the village where the missile hit on November 15th. Poland and other Western states have said the strike was, was from Ukrainian air defense missiles that went astray in pursuit of a Russian missile. Kiev cast doubt on that and sent investigators to the site. Poland's border guard said on Sunday investigators had finished their work. Warsaw, Kiev, and their Western allies have said that ultimate responsibility for the explosion lies with Russia, which invaded Ukraine in February and has been pounding Ukrainian energy facilities with missiles. The victims, named by Polish media as 62-year-old Boguslaw and 60-year-old Bogdan, were buried on Saturday and on Sunday. A missile that crashed inside Poland left a large crater and damaged several vehicles used at the grain drying facility. As we're reporting, 2 grain drying facility workers were killed when the missile crashed into the tiny village on Tuesday while Russia was firing missiles into Ukraine. Polish authorities say it was a Ukrainian air defense weapon that went astray. Kiev has called for further investigation. Dominique, a resident of the town who did not wish to give his surname, says that the shock wave caused by the explosion was pretty large. A damaged tractor and a partially bent trailer were removed from the crash site by heavy vehicles early on Saturday, while other equipment remained at the scene near the pile of metal debris. More on this incident. The United States and Polish authorities have been in touch with Ukraine to clarify the facts about the missile that struck southeastern Poland and 2 people. White House spokesperson Karine Jean-Pierre said this on Friday. Warsaw and its Western allies say evidence from the scene points to the explosion being caused by Ukrainian air defense missile that went astray in pursuit of a Russian missile. Kiev denies this, saying it has evidence of a Russian trace in the blast.
Touch with Ukraine to clarify the facts. Chair of Ukraine's National Security and Defense Council has said that Ukraine remains fully open to a comprehensive analysis of the situation. The party ultimately responsible for this tragic incident is Russia, which launched a barrage of missiles on Ukraine specifically intended to target civilian infrastructure. So we have been public about the fact that our information supports President Duda's preliminary assessment that this was most likely the result of a Ukrainian air defense missile that unfortunately landed in Poland. But the bottom line is Ukraine has a right to defend itself, as we have said many times, and Russia should end this war. This is something that they can do today.
In the meantime, a man killed by a missile that hit southeastern Polish village was buried with national honors on Saturday, the first of 2 funerals following the blast that raised fears of the war in Ukraine spiraling into a wider conflict. The explosion, which Poland and its allies say was caused by a Ukrainian air defense missile that went astray, sent shockwaves around the world, but also plunged the village's residents into mourning for 2 of their neighbors. A procession of mourners led by a military band and honor guard of Polish army troops left the village's Holy Brother Albert Church as a light covering of snow lay on the ground. Soldiers walked ahead of the hearse carrying wreaths tied with ribbons in the Polish national colors, along with a framed photograph and another wreath tied with a yellow and blue ribbon, national colors of Ukraine. The man buried on Saturday, named in Polish media as a 62-year-old man, was working at a grain drying facility in the village when the missile struck. Media outlets have not published the victims' surnames out of consideration for their families. Although the funeral on Saturday was a state occasion, relatives had requested that their privacy be respected. The funeral of the second victim, a 6-year-old, will take place on Sunday. More than $2.7 million away from that particular incident now has been allocated for the restoration of the newly liberated Kherson region. This is according to the Ukrainian Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal, who says this is the beginning of the reconstruction of the region. First of all, he says we're talking about the critical need of residents of the region: access to light, access to water, heat, communication, and medicine. He also adds that people will receive pensions that were accrued to them during the occupation, elaborating on the financial support Ukraine has received from its partners. Canada issued 5-year government bonds that are worth about 500 million Canadian dollars, and that's about $374 million, with the Ukrainian government making a decision to attract an additional $4.5 billion in grant funds from the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development and the International Development Association. Now, Ukraine's Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, which is under Russian control, was again rocked by shelling on Sunday, drawing condemnation from the head of the UN nuclear watchdog, who says such attacks risked a major nuclear disaster. The International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, says more than a dozen of blasts shook the Zaporizhzhia plant, which Russia took control of shortly after its February invasion of Ukraine on Saturday evening and Sunday. Russia's defense ministry spokesman says that Ukraine fired shells at the power plant, supplying the plant, while the TASS news agency reported some of the site storage facilities were hit, quoting an official Russian media nuclear power operator. An IAEA team on the ground says there has been damage to some buildings, some systems, equipment at the plant, Europe's largest nuclear power station. The IAEA team could see some of the explosions from their windows as it occurred. Both Kyiv and Moscow have accused each other of attacking that plant and risking a nuclear accident.
The Kyiv regime does not stop its provocations with the aim of creating a threat of industrial disaster at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. On November 19th, 11 large caliber shells were launched at the station by Ukrainian artillery. In the morning of November 20th, the station was shelled twice by Ukrainian forces. Between 9:15 and 9:45 in the morning, 12 shells were launched. 8 of them exploded between Energy Block 5 and Special Building Number 2. 3 of the shells hit area between Energy Blocks 4 and 5. Another shell hit the roof of Special Building Number 2. Between 10 and 10:10 in the morning, 2 further shells were launched at the power line that supplies electricity to the station. The shelling was conducted from Marinets in the Dnipro region, where it's controlled by Ukrainian military. The firing devices of the enemy were neutralized by return fire of the Russian artillery. Radiation in the area of the nuclear plant remains within norm.
The conflict in Ukraine continues to have a domino effect on economies and businesses around the world, and business in general. To give us an added perspective is Channels Television's Laddie Williams, our business correspondent.
Good morning.
Good morning, Laddie.
Thank God it's Monday. We're back again.
You thanked God it was Friday, now you're thanking God.
I'm thanking God for Monday, yeah.
You should thank God for every day.
Exactly.
The Ukrainians should thank God that, you know, it's always good to look at something, look at the glass half full rather than half empty. So optimism is better than pessimism.
Right.
But as far as the German LNG terminals to cost more than double earlier estimate is concerned, what can you tell us?
That's actually concerning, because we know how, you know, the gas wars in Europe has continued to, you know, fire on with Russia turning off the taps, you know, to Europe, and, you know, Germany has been feeling the effect of that, and that's why they've been looking to, you know, diversify, you know, their supplies for gas. So they're looking at LNG now, liquefied natural gas. It's not the same thing as, you know, the normal gas they're used to, because the infrastructure is already set up for them. They're getting the gas, you know, through the pipes. But now they're having to look for other means of getting gas so that they can support their manufacturing, because they're an export-based economy. Right. That's talking about Germany. So they need to have as much gas, you know, for the winter, also for households. So
is this because of their policy against Russia?
Exactly, because now they're having to, you know, move away from, you know, buying Russian oil, and obviously we've seen Russia actually, you know, turn off the taps, you know, of gas flowing to Europe. So now this LNG terminal, it was estimated to cost about $2 billion, but now they've checked the other dynamics, you know, of the cost, and it's looking like it's going to be double. About $6 billion is what it's going to cost them to actually build this terminal. So that's, you know, that's more cost, you know.
So they have to put their money where their mouth is.
Exactly. Now they're having to, you know, find ways to make up, you know, the shortfall, you know, because they need this LNG terminal, you know, so that there's a constant supply, you know, of gas to the economy, because is Europe's largest economy. They need, gas to get their output out there because they're an export-dependent, country. So it remains to be seen, how they're going to streamline the budget to make up, for this shortfall. But obviously, we know they are, bullish on getting this terminal, afloat and, getting all that LNG, into the country because that's what they need, right now.
And as that is happening, as they're trying to do that, how is the Russian war rewiring international trade?
Yeah, because, we've seen, as Europe is moving away, from Russian oil, the brokers, the ones that, transport the oil, through the cargoes, they've been making a killing, now because they're having to get the oil farther away because normally they take the oil to, other parts of Europe, talking about Russian oil. But now, since we see, China's the one buying, most of the oil from Russia now, and we see India also buying it, so they're having to travel farther, which is actually driving up, the cost of transporting, oil at this time. So the cargo owners are making good money at this time, having to travel farther to deliver oil. By the end of the day, we know it's because Europe is moving away from Russian oil, which is expected because we know how they're trying to cut out that Russian funding for the war, because if they're able to cut off funding, the war might actually end soon. That's why we see the U.S. and the allies have been struggling, trying to find ways, to cut off funding. It's working gradually, but they're still getting that oil and gas, out. They're still making, money from higher oil prices, even though we're seeing oil prices actually decline this morning, but they're still, really elevated.
Speaking of which, the oil prices have slid as far as 3%?
Yes, it's down, big this morning, and it's always China at the end of the day because we're seeing, COVID cases rise in China, and obviously China, they're the biggest importers of oil, and once there's any demand issue with China, it always reflects on the market, and we always see the prices of oil actually decline. But another issue is the big R, recession.
Right.
Globally, all the big economies now are forecasting, either already being in recession or recession coming, ahead, because we know the central bankers are still tightening, rates at this time. So the fear of, trying to tame inflation, but putting the economies into a recession is still, very strong. So at the end of the day, we know the traders, talking about Wall Street, they look at all of this and they see that, demand for oil is going to come down, meaning prices will drop. So we're seeing them price this in, already trying to, take out most of their what they have, already invested in the market. So it's business at the end of the day, it's trading.
Forgive me if I sound pedantic, but the oil prices sliding is not in Russia's favor.
It's actually not in Russia's favor.
The higher the oil prices, the better for Russia.
Exactly.
How does OPEC come into play?
So obviously we've seen OPEC actually cut, supply. No, they actually added supply about 2 million barrels, the last time. And the other, we've seen the U.S., try to bring down the oil prices by telling them to supply more, but they actually cut supply. That's OPEC in their last meeting, and obviously cutting supply is supposed to spike, the price. But we're not seeing that happen because there are other worries now. There's worry about China. There's worry about recession. So all of that, the market is still, very volatile. But some traders are still predicting, oil might actually top $100. But it's looking quite bleak when you see those numbers, those COVID numbers coming out from China.
Now, the numbers from the markets, what's the sentiments for this week?
Well, so we're seeing the U.S. markets already pointing, downward. I checked the futures this morning, and I saw that they were already down in the red. There's a lot coming up this week.
What does that mean?
Well, it shows that, there are already sell-offs already happening in the pre-market, sale. And if you look at the price of Bitcoin too, that's also in the red this morning. We're seeing Europe markets, Asia, that's because of what's happening with COVID. We're seeing investors already selling off, most of those assets, and it's playing into the U.S. market at the same time, because we see investors are watching out for the U.S. Fed minutes from the last meeting. The minutes are coming out, this week, so they're going to be looking out for clues if the Fed is going to cut down, on raising rates going forward. But then Monday is always come out, slow, and we're already seeing that, play out in the market. Investors are watching out, for a lot of things.
Laddie, thank you so much for your perspective on these issues. We will get more on that on Business Morning in just about the top of the next hour.
Yes, it's soon. It's coming.
Please join us for that.
Yeah.
Laddie Williams, much obliged. It's a happy reunion for 57-year-old, that is 67-year-old Vera Tosa, a construction worker who is excited to see his son for the first time in about 8 months. He's amongst the crowd to board the first train that arrived in Kherson since the full-scale Russian invasion in Ukraine began. The train departed from the Kyiv train station on Friday, 18th of November. The train, painted over by various Ukrainian artists, marked the flamboyant celebration of the event with signs such as "People of Steel" and "Train to Victory" inscribed on the train car. The departing was accompanied by Ukrainian rock singer Ole Tripra, performing on stage in the train station, while passengers in the crowd, including Ukrainian soldiers, sang along to renditions of famous Ukrainian songs. The train arrived in Kherson on November 19th, only 1 week after Ukrainian forces liberated the city, the sole regional center Russia managed to occupy since the beginning of what it calls the military campaign in Ukraine. Joining us now is Mr. Vince Onyekwelu, National Security Risk Strategist, former British police officer. You're welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine this morning. We do apologize. We'll have Vince. We hope to have him when we come back. We'll take a break. When we come back, stocking up on groceries. Kherson residents stock up as first Ukrainian supermarket opens. Details in a moment. Please stay with us. Welcome back to our special coverage of the Russian invasion. Joining us now is Vince Onyekwelu, National Security Risk Strategist and also a former British police officer. You're welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me. Good morning.
Very good morning to you. Let's begin with the visit of the British Prime Minister to Ukraine, and Rishi Sunak was a man that came bearing gifts. Obviously, it's a show of support for the Ukrainian effort. But what are your initial thoughts of the promises that he made in the way of buoying the air defense systems of Ukraine against Russian aggression and other issues?
Honestly, I don't think it's a wise decision for Mr. Sunak to pay a visit to Mr. Zelensky of Ukraine. Obviously, the UK is supporting the war on the side of the Ukrainians. So I think Mr. Sunak has done what most politicians would do to get that support, that he's on the side of NATO, that he's on the side of the Americans, that he's on the side of the Five Eyes. All right, yeah, so Five Eyes means the 5 countries that speak English across the world. So we're talking about the UK, the US, the Canadians, New Zealand, and Australia. So these are the 5 Eyes. So obviously, what he has done is a show of support. However, on the other side, I'm not sure how much ground-to-air defense missiles that the UK can boost off. I'm not sure that the UK even has enough ground-to-air defense missiles to borrow or to lend to the Ukrainians. And no smart country would lend off their own defense system to another country like Ukraine. On the other side, I'm not sure of the financial strength of the treasury of Mr. Sunak right now, because UK has just dropped into a recession. We don't know how long this recession is going to last. If it's going to be 2 years or 1 year or shorter. But obviously, analysts are saying it's going to be about 2 years. And now you look at the issues whereby the UK seem to be soft pedaling on the Brexit. They are now starting to bring in discussions about the sort of relationship that Switzerland has with the EU, if that's going to be a better option for the British government or the British nation. So right now, I think the Russians are somehow having an upper hand in this war game, because the British are not too comfortable with their economy, with their government. 3 prime ministers in less than 3 months. We are also talking about the US also, who the midterm elections were not very favorable to the Democrats because they've lost the House of Reps, and they've also lost the almighty Mrs. Pelosi. If you look at other European nations, like Italy now has a female prime minister who is being very straightforward about what's going to benefit Italy as a nation. We now have Mr. Benjamin Netanyahu back in Israel. So Israel have had about 5 elections in the past 5 years. So you look at the major nations in Europe and the supporters of this war between Russians and the Ukrainians, they are all struggling financially, economically, and politically. I think it was a good move for Mr. Sunak, but he couldn't get better than that. That's the best he can do for now.
Some of those reservations that you have informed my question to an earlier guest today as to why he had to make an appearance. Was it also, should one take it into consideration that they just came out of a chaotic situation where he emerged as prime minister, and it will be good for his image and the image of the party going forward if they took on this popular cause, which the British are in support of, that is against the Russian invasion of Ukraine. But let's
obviously,
move on.
Mr. Sunak.
Please,
I said to you earlier on, you need to understand that Mr. Sunak is actually a native Indian. Obviously, he was born in Britain to Indian parents, and obviously, you know the stance of Indian. Obviously, he has to dance to the tune of the British government, what they would like him to do as a British prime minister. But his background as an Indian, and obviously Indians are not supporting Ukraine. Rather, Indians are more on the side of let there be diplomacy, let the war stop, and let lives stop being lost. And let me put this in. The ideas, the policies of Mr. Zelensky of Ukraine, honestly, I feel for the people of Ukraine, because they are the ones that are suffering. We are about to step into tough winter. If you have lived in the Eastern Europe, you don't mess with the Eastern European winter. People are going to die. Lives are going to be lost. The elderly will bear the brunt. We need to stop this war, period.
I wish I had much more time to speak with you, Mr. Vince Onyekwelu. Thank you for your perspective, a national security risk strategist and former British police officer. Thank you for coming on the program this morning.
Thank you for having me.
From there, we'll turn our attention to the devotees who attended Sunday services in Orthodox Cathedral in Ukraine's recently retaken city of Kherson. Many say that they prayed for Kherson's liberation during the entire duration of the occupation. The city of Kherson was occupied by the Russian forces for over 8 months, during which the territory was formally annexed by Moscow, only retaken by Ukrainian forces around a week ago. For Maria, whose 2 sons serving in the Ukrainian army, she hopes that the Russians leave Ukraine peacefully. And Ukrainian forces re-entered Kherson on Friday after Russian troops abandoned the only regional center captured since their full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February. 2 weeks prior to the departure of Russian forces, officials from the Russian-installed government say they had removed the remains of 18th century Russian legendary military commander Grigory Potemkin from its burial place in St. Catherine's Cathedral and moved them to a safe place in fear they could be vandalized. Finally, hundreds of Kherson residents have been flocking to stock up on groceries at the first Ukrainian supermarket to open since the city was retaken by Ukrainian forces over a week ago. During the near 1 month of occupation, the Russian-installed government had brought in Russian-sourced goods and even introduced the ruble as currency. On Sunday, a 49-year-old Natalia, who used to work in Germany as a midwife, queued up amongst the crowds at her favorite Ukrainian supermarket. Kherson remains without electricity, however, running water, or heating. But residents found some relief in buying Ukrainian gherkins, dumplings, horseradish, amongst other household favorites. Among customers packing their grocery carts to the brim was one Artem who was just relieved to finally be able to buy sugar-free Coca-Cola, which he claimed was unavailable during the occupation. That's where we leave it on today's coverage of Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Olumide Macaulay in for your host, Elijah Kerduluale. Have a great week. See you again.